lost my heart and hope to die. Welcome to my dark side.
Join me on Patreon to watch up to 5 episodes of this series and others in advance that are live right now. With that said, enjoy. Ending the night on a high note would only make one assume the next morning would begin just as perfectly. A good night's sleep followed by a warm, refreshing shower. There was no better way to start the day. At least, that's what Panchi believed. And to make the morning even brighter, she kept to her little tradition, cooking breakfast while surrounding herself with the soothing scent of fresh flowers. She hummed a cheerful tune as she worked, her voice soft and melodic, floating through every corner of the 3-story home. The house almost seemed to hum back with her, alive with warmth and comfort. The rich aroma of hot soup and steamed rice drifted up the stairs, curling into every room and nook like an invisible hand beckoning someone awake. It didn't take long before the sound of little feet thumped rapidly down the stairs, light, quick, and impatient. A young girl burst into the dining room, her short blue hair bouncing with each step. She wore a violet t-shirt with bold kanji letters that read Bulma, paired with black jeans and bright pink sneakers that glistened under the morning light. The 9-year-old practically dove into her seat at the dining table, her blue eyes lighting up as the sight and smell of breakfast made her stomach growl. Panchi had already set out a plate and bowl, perfectly portioned and steaming. But before the girl dug in, her gaze darted around the room. Her expression shifted from excitement to mild annoyance. She puffed her cheeks slightly and frowned. "Mommy, where are my strawberries?" she asked, her voice high and demanding, as if this breakfast had a missing piece to a grand puzzle. Panchi turned from the stove, her soft golden curls bouncing, and held up a small pink lunchbox with a teasing smile. "Your lunch is in here, sweetie," she chimed, walking over to set it beside her daughter's plate. "I thought it'd be best not to eat too much this morning. You've got that big test today, remember? I don't want you feeling sluggish." That made sense. Bulma looked down at her breakfast again. The soup sat neatly in a small bowl, and the plate beside it was just big enough to hold a simple but filling meal. Sure, she could have eaten twice this much, but she knew her mom was right. Better to stay light and focused. She'd have plenty of time to feast during lunch. "Thanks, Mom," she said with a small grin before picking up her spoon. Panchi, ever radiant, was dressed in a bright yellow square-neck smocked bodice star top with elegant zigzag patterns. She wore matching high heels and glittering jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. Bulma tilted her head, curious. "Where are you going today?" she asked, squinting suspiciously. She knew her mother didn't dress up like that just to stay home. "After I drop you off at school, I'm going shopping," Panchi announced, her tone cheerful and almost musical. From her bright smile to her confident sway, it was obvious she'd been looking forward to it. Of course, being the wife of Dr. Brief meant money was never an issue. Panchi could buy half the city if she wanted to, and she'd still look good doing it. She could sweep the floors in a silk maxi dress and diamond earrings, and nobody in the house would even blink. But to Bulma, that was both amusing and a little unfair. She had just finished building a flying scooter over the weekend and had been dying to test it out. "But Mom, I can bring myself to school," Bulma pleaded, her lips curling into a pout. Panchi smiled warmly but shook her head. "You'll get to try that out tomorrow," she said in that soft, motherly tone that sounded sweet but unshakable. Noticing her daughter's frown deepen, Panchi giggled and leaned down, pinching Bulma's cheeks playfully. "Oh, come on now, don't be like that, we can't be late. Who knows how many boys are waiting to see you at school." "Ew! Gross!" Bulma exclaimed, sticking out her tongue in disgust. Panchi couldn't help but laugh. She knew her daughter wasn't interested in boys yet, just sweets, gadgets, and her own genius inventions. Still, Panchi couldn't help but tease. Sooner or later, Bulma would grow up and start catching eyes. And Panchi, as any loving mother would, was already preparing herself for that day. The ride to school was interesting. For Panchi, it was pure fun. For Bulma, it was pure embarrassment. She tried to sink lower into her seat each time they passed someone she recognized, hiding her face with her arms. Panchi, on the other hand, didn't care one bit. She sang along loudly and off-key to the pop music blaring from the car's speakers, bobbing her head in completely the wrong rhythm. It wasn't hard to recognize Dr. Brief's family. Everyone in town knew them, the brilliant scientist, his glamorous wife, and their genius little daughter. Bulma was well known at school too. Teachers, staff, even older students, all knew who she was. Most of the adults treated her with extra care, partly because of her father's reputation, and partly because Bulma herself was special. As they pulled up to the school building, the playground and parking lot already buzzed with morning activity. School buses hissed to a stop, and parents waved goodbye to their kids. "We're here," Panchi said with excitement. Bulma exhaled, brushing her bangs aside as she looked at the familiar school gates. Today was going to be easy. Tests were never a problem for her. Her sharp mind could absorb information like a sponge, and if anything ever stumped her, she had her dad, the smartest man she knew, to help her through it. Even though Bulma's intellect already rivaled that of some high school students, she didn't want to skip grades. She wanted a normal life, or at least something close to it. Panchi leaned over with a bright smile. "You feel ready for all your tests, dear?" "More than ready," Bulma declared, pounding her small fists together with fiery determination. Failure wasn't even in her vocabulary. She had studied every subject inside and out, practiced each example from her homework in real life, just to make sure she truly understood it all. There was absolutely no chance she'd score anything less than a perfect 100. Besides, these were the final tests she needed to pass before advancing to the next grade, and she was going to crush them. When it was time for her to step out of the car, she grabbed the door handle and hopped down onto the pavement, her eyes shining with confidence. "Good luck, sweetie," Panchi called out with a bright smile, "and make sure to eat everything. You need a healthy brain to stay smart." "Yes, I know, Mom," Bulma waved as her mother drove off, the car's red paint glinting under the sun. "Bye." As soon as the car disappeared from sight, Bulma turned toward her school. Her lips curled into a smug grin, one that practically screamed, "I've got this." "Time to pass with flying colors," she whispered proudly. The morning was beautiful. The breeze was cool and playful, brushing through the streets of West City as sunlight shimmered across glass buildings and busy sidewalks. The air was alive with motion, cars humming, people chatting, and the faint scent of fresh bread drifting from a nearby bakery. Meanwhile, Panchi was living her best life. She cruised through the city in her red classic Chrysler, the backseat filled with boxes of jewelry and neatly folded shopping bags full of high-end clothes. Her golden hair bounced lightly as she drove, humming to the radio with a smile that could light up the street. People turned their heads as she passed, men and women alike. It wasn't just her flawless style or the expensive car that caught attention, but the natural glow of happiness that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Now that her clothing spree was complete, it was time to restock on food. Panchi pulled into a crowded grocery store parking lot. Every row was packed, and finding an open spot was like hunting for treasure. She turned down one lane, then another, scanning for a gap. A quick glance in her rearview mirror showed a slow-moving gray car trailing behind her. Inside sat a wrinkled old lady with large sunglasses, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. Panchi noticed two open spaces up ahead, one near the entrance and another farther down the row. For a split second, she considered letting the elderly woman have the closer spot. It would be the kind, polite thing to do. But after a tiny shrug and a little smirk, Panchi spun her wheel and pulled right into the front space anyway. The moment she stepped out of her car, the sound of a car horn blared behind her. Panchi turned and waved cheerfully. "Good morning," she said sweetly. The old lady's face twisted with fury. "You stupid, ungrateful, delinquent bitch," she screamed from her window. "Learn some manners." But karma came fast. Distracted by her shouting, the woman failed to notice a car backing out nearby. She hit it head-on with a loud crunch. The airbag exploded out, smacking her so hard it nearly knocked her head back. People around the parking lot gasped in shock. Panchi blinked once, then shrugged. "Oh dear," she murmured casually before turning away and heading toward the store. Inside, the first place she went was the fruit section. "My little Bulma will be mad if I don't bring her strawberries," she said with a light giggle. For most families, 1 or 2 boxes would have been plenty. But Bulma wasn't most kids. She needed at least 5 just to stay happy for the week. Panchi carefully inspected each container, picking out only the ripest, reddest ones before loading 8 into her cart. "Perfect," she whispered to herself. "She'll love these." Now, onto the tea aisle. By the time afternoon rolled around, the atmosphere at West City Elementary had shifted. The morning buzz of excitement had faded into quiet focus and tension. Test day always brought that mix of nerves and determination, students scribbling answers, teachers pacing between desks, and pencils tapping in rhythm. Bulma sat upright at her desk, her expression calm and confident. She was certain she'd aced everything so far. There wasn't a single question that had tripped her up. She could already imagine the perfect scores lighting up the results page. Anyone who dared to doubt her, who said, "What if?" or "maybe," or "but," was swiftly proven wrong. Bulma didn't deal in maybes. She knew. Still, her brilliant mind had a way of wandering. Between math equations and science questions, she found herself thinking about her family. Her big sister, Tights, was coming home later that evening. Her dad had even promised to take a break from work to spend time with them. A rare thing, considering how glued he usually was to his lab. Even their cat, Tama, was considered part of the family and would likely be curled up in his favorite chair by the time everyone was together again. "It's going to be a good night," she thought dreamily. Then, clack! A pen dropped somewhere in the classroom, snapping her out of her thoughts. Bulma blinked and looked around before realizing she'd been daydreaming for a while. She'd been breezing through the tests so easily that she'd let her mind drift off without noticing. Shaking her head lightly, she straightened in her seat and focused back on her paper. No distractions, no breaks, just one goal. She still had a few tests left to ace. All good things had to come to an end, even good days. Unfortunately for Panchi, her pleasant, fast-paced afternoon was beginning to turn into one filled with disappointment. Just moments ago, the road ahead had been wide open, smooth, and peaceful, giving her no reason for concern. But the longer she drove on her way back home, the more cars she saw slowing down, coming to a full stop, until the road turned into a complete traffic jam. She had expected to make it back to Capsule Corporation in about 10 minutes at most. Just enough time to drop off her shopping bags, pick up everything she'd bought, and get a head start on cleaning up the house. But now that seemed impossible. Pulling up behind another car, Panchi looked through her windshield and saw dozens upon dozens of vehicles lined up ahead of her. Many of the drivers had already stepped out, peering forward with looks of worry and curiosity. When there were that many people out of their cars with mouths hanging open, it usually meant something serious was happening. Curiosity tugged at her, and before long, Panchi opened her door and joined the others. It was strange. Everyone was staring ahead as though they were witnessing some tragedy. Yet, it couldn't have been that terrible if this many people were willing to stand around and watch. From the looks of it, this traffic jam had been going on for quite some time. Though in truth, the very first car had only stopped about 30 seconds before Panchi's arrival. Before long, the beating of helicopter blades echoed through the air, and police sirens started wailing across the streets. A few people hurried back into their vehicles, but that only made things worse. The chaos multiplied. Panchi, though not the sharpest knife in the drawer, knew that staying in her car was the worst thing she could do. She quickly turned around, making her way to the sidewalk and breaking into a run, her heels clacking rapidly against the concrete. Her heart pounded in her chest, her blue eyes wide with fear. The terror of not knowing what was going on was what scared her the most. But she wasn't alone. Dozens of others had the same idea. People were rushing in every direction, pushing and shoving, trying to escape whatever danger loomed ahead. The sidewalks became jammed with panicked crowds, trapping people in from all sides. Then came the chaos. Screams, cries, gunshots, explosions. All at once, West City turned into a war zone. Panchi clutched her chest, gasping for breath as she ran. Her mind was racing. What's happening? What's going on? In her frantic search through her pockets, her fingers brushed against something small and metallic. She froze mid-step, eyes going wide. Bulma's scooter capsule. She pulled it out quickly, her breath trembling. She'd meant to give it to her daughter this morning so Bulma could ride to school for the first time on her own. But she decided instead to drive her and take the day to go shopping, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, that decision might save her life. She pressed the top of the capsule, threw it ahead of her, and stepped back, her heart pounding as she waited. Around her, smoke billowed, fires roared, and terrified screams filled the air. Her mind was spinning. It all felt like an out-of-body experience. West City is being attacked. The sight around her was horrifying. Broken limbs, scattered debris, and cars engulfed in flames. For anyone else, it would have been enough to make them collapse in shock. But Panchi refused to freeze. Poof! With a burst of smoke, the capsule expanded into the scooter Bulma had built. Panchi spun toward it, eyes wide with desperate hope, and scrambled onto the seat. Thank goodness! But she never finished the sentence. A sudden boom split the air as the scooter exploded beneath her. The blast threw her backward with brutal force. Her body slammed into a fire hydrant and she fell hard onto the pavement, scraping her arms and knees. If not for the surge of adrenaline pumping through her veins, she would have screamed from the pain, but she couldn't think about that now. Tears stung her eyes as she realized the truth. There was no escaping this. Please, she whispered, her voice shaking. Please, don't hurt me. No one answered. She couldn't see anyone nearby, or at least she thought she couldn't. She prayed, please, someone, anyone, help me. Then, slowly, a shadow appeared on the ground beside her, small, silent, unmoving. Her breath hitched. This shadow wasn't panicking like everyone else. It wasn't running or crying out. It was just standing there, still, watching. Her trembling head turned upward, and her teary eyes met the gaze of a young boy, no taller than her, even as she knelt. For a split second, relief filled her. A child. She'd completely forgotten there were kids caught in this madness too. Her heart broke at the thought of how many must have already died. If this boy had lost his parents, the least she could do was help him escape. Oh my God, she cried, pushing herself up. We have to get out of here. Come on. She reached for his hand and tried to pull him along, but her balance failed her. Her heels slipped, and she fell backward hard onto the pavement. When she looked up again, her heart stopped cold. The boy was smiling. A small twisted smirk crept across his young face. His eyes gleamed with dark amusement. Her pulse froze in terror. This wasn't a frightened child. He wasn't running because he wasn't afraid. He was one of them. And from the look of cruel satisfaction spreading across his face, Panchi understood. This boy was enjoying every second of the horror he'd helped unleash. Please, Panchi screamed, her voice cracking with sheer terror. Spit flew from her trembling lips as she pleaded. I have a husband and 2 daughters. I have a family I love. The boy before her stood silent, small, calm, and terrifyingly still. Kakarot had seen this before. Across countless worlds, he'd heard the same desperate begging from people who wanted to live. For a moment, his grin faded. His young face became blank, expressionless, hollow. He wasn't in a good mood today, not after the news he'd received earlier. The only thing that eased the storm inside him was fighting. That's what he came here for. Battle, destruction, power. The cries of the weak were nothing but background noise to him now. He raised his right palm before Panchi's face. A bright white orb of energy began to form, its glow reflecting in her terrified eyes. She didn't know what it was, but she knew what would happen if it hit her. Still, she tried one last time. "I'm a mother," she screamed, her voice raw and shaking. "Don't do this!" And then, the glowing sphere slowly flickered out. The word mother hit him like a jolt of electricity. For a moment, Kakarot froze. He thought about his own mother, the woman he'd lost. Even at only 4 years old, his mind was sharp, his thoughts too deep for his age. Sometimes, he wondered if her death had been his fault, if running away that day had led to her chasing after him, to her death. Turles had told him it was necessary. That survival mattered more than emotion. But Kakarot still couldn't stop the thoughts from clawing their way back. High above the chaos, Turles stood atop a burning skyscraper, arms folded across his chest. Flames licked the air behind him, and his cold, black eyes burned with silent power. His dark skin gleamed under the red light of fire. He didn't flinch as bullets whizzed past, bouncing harmlessly off his armor-like body. He didn't even blink. No signs of weakness, boy. Kakarot could feel his mentor's gaze from across the city. Cold, piercing, unrelenting. He had to act. After all, he was a true Saiyan warrior. Panchi whimpered softly, lowering her head and shutting her eyes tight. Even though the glowing sphere had vanished, Kakarot hadn't walked away. His shadow loomed over her trembling form. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered one last prayer for her family's safety. Then the boy spoke. "You know," her eyes fluttered open, locking onto his empty, soulless stare. "I had a mother too," he said quietly. Her heart jumped. The tears stopped. Maybe, just maybe, he understood. Maybe this was her chance. If she could just remind him of what it meant to love, to care, to feel. Maybe she could reach the child inside the monster. She looked up, her lips parting to speak. "Once." That was all he said. A blinding white beam erupted from his palm. It pierced straight through Panchi's forehead, the sound sharp and final. Her body went still before slumping to the ground. Humph. Turles smirked faintly. For a moment, he thought the boy might have shown mercy. He was glad to be wrong. Watching from his perch, he turned his gaze upward to the helicopters swarming the sky above. Their machine guns rattled, spraying bullets uselessly in his direction. To him, they were nothing more than buzzing insects. Annoying. He lifted his arm and fired several key blasts, each one streaking through the air like a comet. Boom! 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 Every helicopter exploded in brilliant flashes of orange fire. Screams echoed as burning wreckage rained from the sky. Turles tilted his head back and laughed, deep, cruel, and satisfied, as the city below drowned in chaos. Kakarot turned from Panchi's lifeless body, the hole in her head still glowing faintly with heat. He barely blinked as he stepped past her, only to find himself facing 5 armed men. Each held a weapon, one gripping a rifle, another preparing to throw a flashbang. The grenade's pin clicked. Before it could hit the ground, Kakarot raised his hand and fired 5 key blasts in a blur of motion. Pop! 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 The flashbang detonated mid-air, flooding the street with white light and deafening noise. But by the time the soldiers' vision cleared, their bodies were already falling. 5 shots, 5 kills, all before they could even react. Across the city, at West City Elementary, panic had erupted the moment the attacks began. Bulma and her classmates huddled together, trembling as the loudspeaker crackled with confused voices. Soldiers had already surrounded the school, Earth's military, called in to protect the children. Police cars, armored trucks, and tactical units filled the streets, blocking off every exit. They didn't know what they were up against, only that the city was under siege. If only they knew what kind of power they were facing. The teachers didn't tell the kids the truth. They said it was a natural disaster, a security drill. But the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions told a different story. The children weren't stupid. They could tell something far worse was happening. Still, they obeyed. In one of the darkened classrooms, Bulma crouched behind a desk. The room was quiet except for muffled sobs and trembling breaths. The teacher sat by the door, clutching her phone, whispering prayers that nobody would come inside. Bulma swallowed hard. Okay, stay calm, she told herself. Panic would only get her killed. Her father had always told her, when things get bad, think. Think fast. Think clearly. She peeked over the edge of the desk. The room's windows were small and narrow, but she could fit through one if she needed to. If she ran out the back, she could make it home using the alleyways. Capsule Corporation wasn't far. That was her goal now, get home, find her family. But before she could move, rat-a-tat! Gunfire erupted outside. The nightmare had arrived. And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.